I want to talk about the Bundy trial and Oregon and jury nullification. Um, I'm not really sure when this happened. I think it was last year. I know I lose track of time, but basically there's those guys that came from Utah or Nevada or wherever they're from, the Bundys, and they had a bunch of militia members with them, and they came over and took over a building in a national park. Anyway, so they're that federal trial wrapped up, and they were found not guilty on two different counts. One was uh, conspiracy to what is it again? Conspiracy to impede or injure an officer, federal officer, and the other one was possession of firearms and dangerous weapons in federal facilities. Anyway, so they were found guilty, and a lot of people on Facebook were saying this is jury nullification, basically, like without I don't know reciting any of the facts or anything. Just basically, it's got to be jury nullification. And so I want to take a little bit of time to talk about this particular trial and jury nullification. So there's three ways that someone can be found innocent or not guilty in a trial, criminal trial in the United States. One is if they're innocent. If the jury member believes, I'm sorry, I should say that there's three ways a jury member could find a person not guilty. One is if the jury member thinks that they're innocent. The second one is if the jury member thinks that there's reasonable doubt. So our system grants reasonable doubt. So if they think there's reasonable doubt that the person committed the crime, then they will find them innocent, or they're instructed to find them innocent. And then the last way they would find them innocent is through jury nullification. So let me define jury nullification. Jury nullification basically is the juror. This is for the purposes of this video. I mean, I don't know what I'm sure there's some sort of definition out there, but jury nullification is when a juror does not like the just outcome or the proper, I shouldn't say just, the proper outcome of the law. And so the law is properly applied, and the jury member does not like the outcome, and so they decide to go against whatever the law said. That's jury nullification. So basically, so simple example, man's wife gets harassed. Guy comes up and yells at a man's wife. The man hauls off and decks the guy that yells at his wife. Okay, I mean I think this would be a pretty common jury nullification example. The guy would be guilty of a battery, an assault and a battery. You can't punch someone for yelling at you. You're not allowed to do that. So that would be an example of jury nullification. So let me give. Okay, so that's an example. I think another example would be an example of when the defendant's found not guilty and it's not jury nullification. So, for example, with the Casey Anthony trial, she was the one that, she was found innocent, but she was the one that allegedly left her. Somehow her kid died, and then she went and partied, and yeah. Anyway, so and then they found out about the kid was dead. He was missing, and then they found out he was dead, and so she got tried. They thought she was going to be guilty for sure. The prosecution was pretty. I think this is the Casey Anthony trial. The prosecution was pretty sure she was going to be found guilty, but then they found her not guilty. Now, that's a case where I don't think it was jury nullification. Now, to me, that seems like she's guilty. I wouldn't go and party after my kid went up missing. So it seemed like the motive or the state of mind shows a guilty conscience. But the jury didn't find that, and it's somewhat reasonable that they didn't find it because there wasn't a lot of physical evidence linking her to the death of her child. There's like no blood in the house, or there was no murder weapon, I'm pretty sure. So anyway, the jury found her not guilty, but it wasn't jury nullification. It was either just because they thought she was innocent, or there wasn't, or the reasonable doubt argument. I can kind of understand a reasonable doubt argument there. Um, so that's an example of someone being found innocent and not the result of jury nullification. So I gave you an example of jury nullification and an example of innocence without jury nullification. Let me talk about the facts of what happened with the Bundy thing a little bit. So basically the protesters came in and so a guy in somewhere in Eastern Oregon, I think this is down by Burns. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Basically, he burned on his property, and he'd had some issues with the government and in the land. The thing you got to understand if you don't live out in these places is, I mean, this is huge areas of brush and just. I mean, there's not in a lot of areas. There's not even trees, not even like big green trees like Oregon's known for. A lot of it's just essentially worthless, kind of semi-desert land, semi-arid, arid land, and the government owns big chunks of it because people they don't have a use for it. I mean, it's hard to do anything with it, and so the government will end up owning a lot of it. And so basically, this guy that got in trouble with the government, he had big chunks of land. The government has big chunks of land. They butt up against each other. He was doing things with water they didn't like. There's a whole drawn out thing. Well, they ended up charging him with he did a burn on his land that it flowed over to the government land. But like I said, the whole area is just worthless. I mean, land, you can't tell, one rock from another rock. I mean, just huge area of, it's not like you're talking about a city, where you're setting a fire. This is a big worthless area, and they burn the stuff to plant crops and for other purposes, and like prevent forest fires, that kind of stuff, or controlled forest fires. So the government, because they'd had problems with him, they charged him with a crime that was put in place by during the Bush era, during the post 9/11 Bush era, which basically made it a crime to they made it a crime to burn for the effect to cause terrorism. So basically, reacting to 9/11, they made a law that changed it just from like arson to arson with the intent of causing damage, causing terror. So basically, they didn't want a bunch of terrorists going into the woods lighting fires, and the idea was to give it some more teeth to just an ordinary arson. And so like this guy, if he wrongfully burned stuff, and they accused him of lying and all these kind of things, it doesn't matter really if he lied or whatever. If he just burned some government property, like say 100 acres, the cost to the government's $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000. Like it's not a huge, it's not, like I said, it's not like burning down a house, which is going to cost several $100,000 of damage. But they basically found intent that he was terrorizing the government, essentially, or terrorizing the local area, and they charged him with this. See, they never should have charged him with a crime like that, because obviously that's not the point of the law. The point of the law is to prevent people from running around being terrorists. But they found this guy out in the middle of nowhere. He did something they didn't like. They charged him with terrorism. Okay, long story, wasn't very short, but the dad and the kid, the dad's like in his 70s and the kid's in his 30s or 40s, I'm not sure. They both get a prison sentence for several years, and there's a mandatory minimum on it, so that such that the old guy is looking at something like a 5-year mandatory minimum. Okay, so this kind of treatment, and then the stuff that happened, and I hope it's clear to people, and I think it's not clear to some people, that that's unjust. You shouldn't give a guy a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence for an improper burn out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, that is not a fair penalty. It should be, it may be as much as $10,000 of damage, but it's or a fine, maybe community service. I mean, you could even give him like a month in prison, but yeah, like I said, they gave him 5 years. Too much. So then in reaction to this, and some other problems that the Bundys have had. The Bundys are cattle people, I think, in Nevada. Um, I'll come back to the Bundys. I'm not like a Bundy fan, but in reaction to this, they got a bunch of people together and they went to the town. Like I said, I think it's Burns, and they walked around with firearms. They ended up taking over a. Basically, their whole point is the government shouldn't own federal land. It's not in the Constitution for the government to own federal land, and so they went out into one of the parks, and there was an empty building that the park rangers used from time to time. It's empty because it was in the wintertime, and they took it over. They went and they squatted there, and they all had this get together. They got their weapons, like, probably lighting bonfires and talking about the government and all these kind of things. Okay. So yeah, all that. So then basically they're there, they're just kind of kicking it. They walk around there's no threatening. There's not like them pointing guns at people. A lot of people argue that it's threatening what they're doing, but they're not like directly threatening people. They're not pointing weapons at people. They're not preventing people from going places. The place that they were at was, like I said, abandoned during the winter or just very infrequently used, which is why they were able to set up shop there without disturbing anyone. So yeah. And people in Burns didn't like it mostly because people were walking around with weapons in the middle of town, which I wouldn't like that either. Okay, so long story short, a guy gets killed in an interaction with police, and then the rest of them are arrested and then charged and tried. Okay, so they're tried for two crimes. The first one is 18 USC 372, and you can just Google that, 18 USC 372, and it's conspiracy to impede or injure officer. Injure officer. And I'll just read the text really quickly, and you'll kind of see, just to give you a flavor of what this says. If two or more persons in any state, territory, possession, or district conspire to prevent by force, intimidation, or threat any person from accepting or holding any office, trust, or place of confidence under the United States, or from discharging any duties, or to introduce by like means any officer of the United States to leave the place where his duties as an officer are required to be performed, so on and so forth, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 6 years. Okay, so the point of this statute is basically if a person by force, intimidation, or threat attempts to prevent an officer of the United States, somebody that works for the federal government, from discharging any of their duties, then they're guilty of this crime. Okay, so let me give you an example of what this is aimed at. So say a person's being audited by an IRS treasury agent, and the person is guilty of, they owe another 20 or 30 grand to the IRS, and they know they owe it. And they know that if the IRS treasury agent, if he investigates or, audits them correctly, he's going to find it. So what he does is he says, hey, look, we can make this go away. I'll just give you 5 grand or whatever. And, that would be bribery. Okay, so not bribery, but like let's just make this go away, and if you don't go away, I'm gonna come over to your house and I'm gonna spray paint your house. Okay, so he follows him home. He knows where he lives. He says, you live on such and such address, and I'm gonna come spray paint your house, right? And so basically, with the option of the IRS agent is to do his job. The guy comes over and spray paints his house and causes all kinds of problems. And that he has to deal with. And so like spray painting a person's house, you're going to get, maybe, max like 10 days. You're not going to be in jail, and you're going to get just a small fine. Right. And so what happens is the danger is that the person can do a lesser crime to this federal agent, a federal officer, representative, whatever, to get them to stop doing their job. So the purpose of the federal law is to put teeth, even to put teeth on like a lesser form of intimidation. So for instance, if he said he's going to kill the federal officer, then there'd be a penalty to that's would prevent him from doing that. But if he's like I said, if he's going to harass him, he's going to spray paint his house or do donuts and TP it and follow his kids to school in a car or whatever, just like all kinds of creepy small destruction things, he might end up convincing the federal officer to, hey, you know what? I'll just wrap this one up and move on to the next case and make my life easier, right? So basically, the point of this law is to stop that from happening, to keep someone from doing a lesser kind of crime, or even something that's not a crime, like intimidation, for instance, is in the statute here. It's force by force or intimidation. Basically, keep them from doing their duty by intimidating them. Okay, so this is not really so. So the point here that I was trying to make is this is not really jury nullification necessarily. Whenever you have a trial, there is the potential for jury nullification. That's always the case. A juror may see what the law is, and they may decide that that's not what it is. But in this particular trial, it's not necessarily have to be jury nullification. So the Bundys and all those people, their primary purpose, or at least what they're saying, is to protest. To protest what the federal government is doing, and they're protesting in a particular way, a way that I don't recommend, but they're protesting in a particular way. But it's not for the purpose of stopping the parks people from driving around the park, inspecting things and making sure things are going well. That's not why they did it. That's not why they took the building over. So there's room to find them not guilty of this charge in their intent of taking over the wildlife refuge. It's not an automatic thing. Okay. So it doesn't have to be jury nullification. It just might not meet the statute. Okay. The other one that they were charged with was 18 USC 930, and I'm not going to read this one because it's a lot longer, but it's possession of firearms it says and dangerous weapons, or dangerous weapons in federal facilities. So basically, this crime is if you carry federal firearms in a facility, then you are guilty of it, and you can get up. The first one is if you don't do anything wrong with the firearm, you can get up to 1 year. Shall be fined under this title or in prison not more than 1 year or both. But so this one though requires Part H requires notice, and like I said, you can Google these statutes and they'll pop up under law.cornell.edu. Great website. So under H, they have to have notice that you're not allowed to carry a weapon here. So that's the first part. It's not just carrying weapons on the property. There has to be notice that it's federal property and you're not allowed to carry weapons there. And they actually have. I think you actually have to see the notice. Had actual notice. Anyway, the point is it had to be notice, but they have to have notice. But then the stronger one is G1, which says that the term federal facility means a building or part thereof or leased by the federal government where the federal employees are regularly present for the purpose of performing their official duties. So they have to be regularly present at the facility. Well, this facility is like, it's like I think it's like a log cabin or something. I mean, it's like a ranger station type thing. There's the whole reason these guys were able to break in there without having to threaten anyone is because there's nobody there. There's nobody present. So for this law to apply, there has to be federal employees regularly present, which is just, there's different ways you could define regularly present. And I imagine that's been litigated, but I think a juror very easily could find that these people weren't regularly present. I think like the entire winter they might not come out there. Like the people might not come out to that facility for months at a time. So again, it doesn't have to be a jury nullification. It could be that they found that the guys weren't regularly present. Okay, well, let me wrap up here. If you've listened this far, let me give you my thoughts on some of the takeaways here. The first of all is don't be a Facebook lawyer, a Facebook lawyer, juror, or judge. That's the problem. This is kind of what I got irritated about on Facebook is people just, without knowing any of the facts of the case, without following it, reading one story that's maybe 2 pages long, they decided that this is that this was that this was unacceptable, that this had to be jury nullification. Okay, and this goes for all the different trials that happened. So Trayvon Martin, uh, the guy in Michael Brown, the guy in uh, the place in Missouri. That case, the guy that was selling the cigarettes up in New Jersey or wherever, Eric Garner, the guy, I feel real bad for him, but it don't just don't just fall on somebody's side just because, for instance, people that you tend not to like are on the other side. Like don't make a decision until you really know what happened, and so you have facts, and it takes a long time. And frankly, even if you read a bunch of articles, you're still not going to know as much as people that actually sit in these courtrooms and listen to the cases. So don't be an internet lawyer. Don't show your bias by siding with a particular person, just because, and don't do it because of race or politics or anything like that. I think that's really ugly and ignorant. So don't be like that. Wait for all the facts. I'm reading my notes here. Yeah, these trials are very complex. I mean, the study of law is a complex thing, um, and so don't just jump to conclusions. Okay, another thing I want to say is the protest was really stupid. You should never, if you want to protest something, don't break the law. That's like protest thing number one is don't break the law. And if you're breaking the law, don't bring or if you're protesting, don't bring a gun to the protest. If you're going to be in friction with police officers or any other government people, don't bring a firearm, because they could potentially find problems with what you're doing. So I like that they protested. We need to smartly resist government tyranny, and I believe that with those guys that set the fire in Burns, that they most likely are victims of government tyranny. I don't think that they were acting as terrorists when they lit the fire. The Bundys, I don't know as much about the Bundys, and I'm just going to set them aside. But it's good to protest government tyranny. That's what the Declarations of Independence was all about. That's what our country was founded on. But do it smartly. Do it wisely. Don't throw your life away, or like the guy that ended up resisting arrest and he got shot. He had like 7 kids or 5 kids. He got too emotional and he made bad choices. He should have never gone there with a weapon. You just have to bear things in life, and yeah. Anyway, I'm just yakking now. So that basically was my recap of the jury nullification and the Bundy trial. Be smart. Don't do that stuff. If you enjoyed, I'm gonna try to do some videos if I can get this up on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you listen to the whole thing. And that will encourage me to put out more material. I want to put out educational type material, and I'm trying to get this figured out on how to do this kind of stuff. But yeah, thanks.